for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Elizabeth Gabay MW was born in New York, grew up in London and has lived in the French Alps for the last 20 years. Following a mixed early career in journalism, publishing and the theatre, she set up her own wine company after doing a tasting course at Christie's. Almost by accident, she was asked to write a book about rosé, a style of wine she claimed to dislike, and has now become an evangelist, as well as the world's leading expert on pink wines.
Hi Tim, thanks for inviting me.
It's wonderful to have you on the show, and you're in the south of France, aren't you? Lucky person in the French Alps.
Yeah, I'm at 1,000 metres, which near Nice. Yeah. A little chilly in the evening, though.
I bet it is. I mean, your background is really fascinating. So you've got to tell us about where you were born and your parents, because, I mean, what a couple. Wow.
Yeah, so I suppose a lot of people go, oh, well, you're so English. And I kind of snigger and think, no, not really. So my father was born in Istanbul. Yeah. Leftovers of the Ottoman Empire. So, we've got Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, lots of things thrown in. He came to art school in Leicester and he met my mother. And they sort of eloped to Venezuela, got married there, and then decided to move to New York. And I was born in New York. And when I was 2, my mother came back to see her family and she came home and she said, London, things are happening. 63. Let's go back to London. So we moved back to England.
And, with such a kind of exotic background, were your parents foodies? And they must have been, I suppose. Or...
They were to a certain extent. My father would say things like, can you cook this dish that I remember as a child? And my mother would say, how was it cooked? And he said, I don't know. So she bought Claudia Roden's cookbook.
Yeah.
And she worked her way through that. And then as a child, we just spent all my holidays driving around France. My mother had Elizabeth David, Michelin Guide, History Guide, and we went from village to village trying out little restaurants.
They sound brilliant. I mean, that's... And not surprisingly, your first academic love was history. You studied that at University of Leeds. What were your sort of specialist periods?
It was a big romantic, medieval, classics, archaeology, history of art. Really useful career move.
I think in those days, we didn't worry about career moves, did we? I mean, I studied French language and literature. I never thought, will this get me a career? I just thought I'm quite good at it and I quite like it. And I thought, exactly. I don't want to do English because I can read English anywhere. I want to study something else. Really.
Well, I think it was like, if you got to university, you were part of a sort of bubble, weren't you?
Yeah.
And I did debate on doing English, but I thought I didn't want to ruin my love of reading.
That's exactly what I felt. I didn't want to have to read Dryden and things like that.
Yeah, so I didn't. But, yeah, and I loved Leeds. It was...
Yeah. Great city. And any favourite historians, any books you'd recommend at the moment? People that you think, oh, read them.
Well, it's strange, actually, because I don't know whether it's the internet or... age or whatever, but I no longer read a book from cover to cover. You dip into a chapter and you think, I'll just read that one chapter.
Yeah.
So it's a bit frustrating, I suppose, if you're for an author. I skim. I think, oh yeah, I'm just going to read up about, I was just reading about a museum. I'm going to Bandol on Wednesday and read about this museum. There are all these castles along the coast at Bandol to stop the Spanish in the 16th century. So I sort of went off at a tangent and thought, ooh.
And that all, I mean, I like that about wine. History ties into wine, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Obviously. But if you're aware of it around you, I mean, I'm amazed that people don't find that bit of wine fascinating in a way.
I hate to say it's probably the bit I still enjoy most.
Yeah. You're like me. But what about books on wine and history?
So this caused a big problem. I sort of went, I must have some books on history. And I think when I first started in wine, I trawled secondhand bookshops. Things like Sitchell, Jeffs, Allen, which weren't written as history books, but are now a window into what it was like. And I really liked that. And then I found a couple of history books on wine. There's that one on phylloxera, there's Wine and War, which have never quite expanded as much as I wanted them to. But no, there aren't so many.
But, readable books about wine and history. I mean, those are two of them, certainly, aren't there? I mean, I like The Rise and Fall of the House of Mondavi. That's a good book. It's been fun.
I've not read that. I've got one on Woodhouse and Marsala.
Oh, that sounds good. And The Billionaire's Vinegar. I mean, that's an interesting book. I mean, it's not so much, that's more modern history, I suppose. Yeah. Tell us about your 20s, because they sound like a lot of fun. I mean, you're a bit of a traveller anyway, but you worked on History Today magazine, then you academic publishing in Oxford, then, amazingly, marketing department at Sadler's Wells, not as a dancer, but as in the marketing department. And then you went backpacking around the world. So which bit did you enjoy most and why?
So I got all three of those jobs. My father worked in his first job from 1955 was in computers. So I grew up with computers. And so every job I got in the early 80s was, you know how to use a computer. Very, very rare.
First Amstrad I bought in 1986.
Exactly. And so it was like gold dust. So I enjoyed History Today. No, I mean, I was just the office junior, publishing in Oxford. It was okay. I loved the theatre. Theatre was my other big passion. And in the 70s, London theatre was brilliant. It wasn't shows, it was theatre, really good theatre. And so being at Sadler's Wells, I had 2 years of indulging theatre.
And I suppose the actors of those days weren't necessarily doing Hollywood, were they? I mean, you could see Olivier on the stage in London, and Ralph Richardson and all those sorts of people, Yeah,
and I still have all those programmes, so I can trace big names going on,
They're probably worth a bob or two, aren't they?
Apparently not.
No. I mean, my dad went to see Beyond the Fringe, I think in New York, and he sent the programme to Alan Bennett and said, you might like to have this. And Alan Bennett sent it back with a very nice note saying, thank you very much. I don't collect theatre programmes.
Yeah.
So he ended up with a note from Alan Bennett anyway. I mean, were you thinking about your future career at that point, or were you just sort of thinking, does anybody in their 20s? I feel a bit sad for people who are accountants or lawyers where their kind of career path is set, isn't it?
I don't think I did, actually. I mean, I think as a student, I think we're the same sort of generation. So we were more into real ale than wine.
Yeah.
And I was into conservation. I did want to join a commune, but that sort of didn't really happen.
Where?
Wales. I had a friend who joined a commune in Wales, and I thought that
Thank God you didn't.
didn't. And then the university careers officer said to me, I think you'd be good in restaurants and hotels. And I went, what an idiot. He obviously doesn't know me, and walked away from it. But I must have liked wine, because I remember, like office parties at Sadler's Wells, people would say, we've opened up some nice wine for you. I don't remember this, but I remember people's reactions to me. And then when I went traveling, I remember to Miami, visiting cousins in Miami, and my great aunt, Tante Eugenie, the rest of the family were having Coca-Cola, and Tante Eugenie said, I shall have a bottle of wine with Elizabeth. So the two of us just sat there. So I must have liked wine, but I don't recall it ever being a career.
Yeah, but when did you get the wine bug? I mean, did you go in any did you visit any wine producing regions? I mean, you mentioned your tante.
Napa.
Yeah.
As a tourist, got to New Zealand, and I went to go on a tour of vineyards, and I took one look at all these old people. They're probably about 40. And thought, no way. And then I did Hunter Valley, Barossa, and then came back to England, and my parents had bought a little holiday cottage in Provence. I went to visit them, and we visited. I mean, they're now quite well-known estates, but they were little sort of rustic estates. And I loaded up the car and came back, and I think it was my mother. She saw that this man called Stephen Spurrier was doing a wine course at Christie's. Why didn't I go? So I went along, and it was full of bankers. And the course was, how do you go to a restaurant and order wine? So we tasted the most amazing wine. And at the end, I said, I'm really sorry, I can't afford to do the second one. So he said, well, if you'd like to pour the wine, you can do it for free.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, he was sort of very encouraging.
What a gent.
Yeah. And then he said, why don't you do WSET? Okay.
So this is Wine Inspector Education Trust exams, yeah? You started doing those?
Higher certificate.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. So I have that photograph of the first time we met, which must have been 87, 88 at some Sapexa dinner.
Oh, God.
I can't remember. It was all very... they used to do a lot of very grand events in those days.
Yeah, they did, didn't they? Oh, God, it's all gone, isn't it? But, you set up your own business, didn't you? Elizabeth Gabay and Partners in 87. I mean, it sounds very bold. I mean, you're only, 5 years out of university. You've just done the Stephen Spurrier course. Yeah. So you were doing the WSET exams by that point, were you?
Complete idiot, really. Talk about naive. I just came from a family of everyone was self-employed, so the thought of being an employee was like, that was the worst thing you could do. And I remember Michael Polly was on my course, and he worked at Oddbin, so I thought that sounded really good fun. And the whole family was like, you can't.
Don't be an employee.
No, it's just like, that was the worst thing you could possibly... You're best being poor and self-employed than earn any money as an employee.
I kind of agree with that. I've been self-employed almost all my life. I think I'm essentially unemployable. We get to a point where we're just unemployable.
Can't do it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you qualified as a Master of Wine in 1998, yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, who helped you most during your studies? I mean, Stephen Spurrier had inspired you. Were there inspiring women in wine by that point? I mean, Jancis was around, certainly, wasn't she? And Rosemary George, Serena Sutcliffe?
So my two mentors were Jane Skilton and Lynn Sheriff.
Yeah.
But it was sort of... We didn't have the same sort of mentoring system in the 90s. It was very much ad hoc.
Yeah.
And I think it was very much, I was bringing over wine, so I visited vineyards. I taught self-taught, very much more self-taught. And I met my husband the first week of the MW program, and they said no social life. But he was really supportive. And he was really practical. He was kind of going, well, it's not arty-farty stuff. This is a business. And if you're looking at, there's that question of you have to start up a vineyard. What would you do?
Yeah.
And all the people who weren't in...
is the answer, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And he would come out with those formulas and kind of going, well, can you afford to buy the vines? Can you... And that grounded me.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really drink. My future mother-in-law was worried I'd be an alcoholic. So he wasn't a drinker and he wasn't a wino. And in fact, the first book he got me, can't remember who it's by. It's about wine snobbery. Do you remember that book? Andrew Bird. That was his first present to me.
You learnt while you were doing it, you wish you'd known at the beginning. I mean, I asked Rod Smith this because he was on the podcast recently.
I think my big problem is I sort of drift through life in a sort of haze of life, really. I cannot remember. I think one thing I should have done, I should have been better at networking with my contemporaries.
Yeah.
I had a life outside of wine and I did that. I didn't spend my time networking.
Yeah. I mean, your next move, interesting, you left London for a small village in the southeast of France called Saint-Martin-Vésubie, which you call your little piece of heaven away from the world. You're still there, yeah? Did you just feel like a lifestyle change? I mean, you continue to run the business from there, the Elizabeth Gabay and Partners? Did the focus shift of the business? What happened?
So when my son was born in 96, and basically heaving boxes and babies doesn't work. So I stopped selling wine and acted as a tasting consultant. Both my children, I have to say, were born 9.5 months after an MW exam.
There must have been the joy of finishing.
The joy of finishing. So my graduation photographs, I'm very heavily pregnant with my second child. I mean, it was just impossible. I just, was struggling to work. We felt we were getting into that rat race of, do you have a big enough house, big enough car, your kids go to private school. Yeah. And we just looked at each other one evening and just said, we've grown up in London, we're going to die in London. And my husband never makes a fast decision. And in one evening, he goes, right, we're moving. I was like, okay.
And you said, is your husband French?
No, he's a Londoner. And but he can speak French. Yeah. So we looked for 18 months. We looked at so many castles. I know a lot about castles.
Well, it's the history again, right?
Absolutely. But you learn that the reason why castles are cheap is because no one else wants to live in them.
What to pay the heating bill, probably?
You've got lead pipes, heating, and I remember we went to one castle. Beautiful castle, but it was a bit smelly. And the estate agent said, well, the other half of the castle is owned by a pig farmer. So why don't you go to the pig farmer and see if he wants to sell? So my husband trotted off to the pig farm and he said it was like talking to Eddie Grundy. And Eddie Grundy said, yeah, sure, I will sell you my half, but you have to buy me a farm somewhere in Burgundy, which isn't going to work.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love it. And when did your fascination with rosé begin? Was there one wine? Was there a visit that sort of lit the spark?
No. No. I was approached by Classic Wine Library. So when the children were little, one of my pet projects, which does need to be finished, it is almost finished, was a book on the history of the drink punch.
Yeah.
So I got sent the book on spirits. Could I review it? And I jokingly said, do you fancy a book on Provence? And they sort of hummed and hawed and then called back 10 minutes later and said, what about a book on rosé? So I went down to my husband and I said, I've just been commissioned to write a book on rosé. And he said, but you don't like rosé. Do it. I can easily do it. It can't be that difficult. And then what happened? I think I went on Twitter in the days when we used to use Twitter. And said, anyone know anything about rosé? And a lot of people responded. So I got a lot of wine sent in. I was like, really? Yeah, I didn't know people did this with rosé. And so I suppose what was interesting is I went through the discovery while doing the book.
Oh, how interesting. So you didn't start with preconceived ideas, really, but what was good or, yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, I still quite like slightly wacky rosé. That still appeals to me.
I mean, that book became Rosé, Understanding the Pink Wine Revolution, classic. Was it the first book that took the category seriously or even wrote about the category at all, really, wasn't
it? There are a couple of Swedish and Dutch books published in Swedish and Dutch about Provence, which included rosé. And there were 3 other books published in 2017 in America on rosé, very much consumer orientated with lists of wines. This is the first book and the only book that actually does a global history tracing the evolution.
Yeah.
And the thing I was very keen on was that we tend to see rosé as coming from Provence, which is where they have perfected a lot of the technical things, but it's in context of a global heritage, really. And so I think, things like Mateusz Rosé that was and still is the biggest selling rosé in the world.
Is it?
Yes.
And I don't know if this story is true. Somebody told me that the guy who owns the palace, which is on the label, I can't remember, it's called Bruxelles, or I can't remember what it's the name of the palace, but he was offered a royalty, I think, on the Matthias when it was made, and he said, oh, God, this thing's never going to sell, and he took a fee instead.
Idiot,
like one of the life's big mistakes, really. So which countries did you visit when you were doing it? Did you travel a lot to do it?
Nope. Because, of course, I didn't think rosé was going to be that interesting. So they said, can you do it in 6 months? And I said, what about 9? No, I said, yes, I could do it in 6 months. And one of the problems with it being the first book like this, I didn't know where I would need to travel to. So all I could do was actually contact people and say, can you send stuff in? So the Spanish and Italian chapters for me are the weakest. Because there was no one to talk to about it.
And the French chapter's strong because you were living there as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even so I was, I've asked to redo the book.
Yeah.
But you can only do 20% if it's a second edition, otherwise it's a new book.
Oh, right, yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Which country has the most developed rosé industry? I mean, presumably now it's France. It's not Provence in particular.
So consumption of rosé in Provence is really high, but you've got to remember it also includes aromatized rosé.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, that shifts the figures. Spain, I think, produces more rosé.
Yeah, well, I'd have thought there'd be a lot from places like Navarra.
A lot of it, gets shipped into France. The trouble with France is that Provence dominates, and so every other region is very, very close to losing their heritage.
Yeah, like Anjou and places like that, presumably.
Almost lost. Bordeaux, they make a Provence style, whereas Spain and Italy are still hovering between the two. Should we go Provence or can we make our own style?
Yeah.
So those 3 countries are still the main focus. Austria is doing well. Greece is doing well.
Which has the most potential, do you think? Greece, maybe? I mean, those Thymiopoulos wines are good, aren't they? And they age well as well.
Yeah, but it's such a small percentage. You hold in one. I was in Greece last year and I was so excited. I went for a rosé festival.
What's happening there?
The faults, they're just not having the technical know-how. So the potential is there.
Yeah. And you talk about the pink wine revolution. It's the title of the book. I don't know if it was your title, but I mean, when did it start? Who was the progenitor, if you like, of the pink wine revolution? Was it Tempier, something like that? Do you think in Bordeaux?
No. So I think it was quite interesting in that I remember going on a trade stand, London Wine Fair, when it was at Kensington. On the
That's a long time ago, isn't it? We both remember that.
Yeah. And a couple of producers coming along with the pale rosé, and we all kind of went, that's just not going to sell.
It's never going to sell.
Never going to, a bit like this guy from Matthias. And so that was quite a sort of revolutionary thing, and the technical know-how. And then the Rosé Research Centre, making clean rosé, but I think I probably taste more faulty wine than people focusing on red and white, because rosé.
What are the faults?
So oxidation. Grenache oxidizes so easily. Light strike.
Yeah.
A lot of producers still tell me their wine doesn't have light strike.
And these clear bottles, yeah?
Yeah. It's a big, big problem. Too high alcohol, so it tends to have that slightly volatile character. Over focus on colour, so that you have no fruit. It's
so pale they've stripped everything out of it.
Everything, yeah.
So
that was how it was developing, and then 2003, the heat wave year, everyone wanted rosé. 2007, Sacha Lachine. 2010, Instagram. Big influence. 2013, Brad Pitt.
2013, And Angelina as well, of course, right?
Oh, yes. Well, we tend not to talk about her. just moved on. And then when I went to talk to people in Spain, and they were all doing oak rosé before Sacha Lachine made it famous.
Yeah.
And there were sort of little conversations like, he came and asked us, and he never mentions us. So
he's done all right, hasn't he?
Absolutely. So I think it was this sort of slow evolution.
Yeah. It's a number of things, basically.
A number of things, one thing.
I love your thing about the London Wine Trade Fair with somebody bringing you this pale wine. You say it's never going to catch on. It's like the Beatles, wasn't it? People said, groups with guitars, nobody's going to listen to them. Just tell us a bit about the different ways that rosé is made. I mean, Saignée or Sangrado in Spain, direct pressing, and then the blending of red and white grapes. I mean, is one better than the others? I mean, is one better suited to a certain style of wine, or were they all equally serviceable?
I think they're all equally serviceable. I think the most important thing is the quality of the winemaker.
Yeah.
So,
and the grapes?
And the grapes. But I think any grape, I think one of the grapes I least like for rosé is Mourvèdre.
Yeah.
And nothing bugs me more than people grabbing hold of Domaine Tempier in April following the vintage saying, best rosé in the world. Mourvèdre is so reductive.
Yeah.
Unless it's been in oak or had some aging, it's a complete waste of money. Absolutely. Yeah. So the thing with Sangrado or Saignée is that if it is a byproduct of a red wine, you have to be such a good winemaker so that it's not too tannic.
To know when to take it off the skin.
When to take it off. But if you think that, in effect, Saignée or long maceration is how you make Tavel and Navarre, and they can both make excellent rosé.
Yeah.
It's sort of rather putting that to one side. I've had, you've had as well, in Rioja, rosés made with like 70% white grapes.
Yeah, that was very common, wasn't it? And Ribera del Duero as well. You know, historically, Ribera was a rosé region until the late 70s.
And it's beautiful. And I think one of the things about white grapes is you can allow the red grapes to be ripe and have lots of fruit, but still have the freshness from the red grapes, and the white grapes bring an acidity.
Yeah.
But I also like that blend of, if you can macerate the white, skin contact the white grapes to get texture, and then blend it in with the red, and then you start getting really exciting texture, fruit, all sorts of things.
But am I right in saying it's illegal to blend white and red wines in some places? No, you can't.
Wrong.
So
the rule is, if the appellation allows you to blend red and white wine, you can.
Yeah.
So Tavel, you can blend red and white wine.
Yeah. But Provence, you can't. Is that right?
Provence, you can't.
Right. I meant that. Yeah. Then in certain places, it's illegal.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, can the best rosés be considered fine wine? I mean, Tondonia rosé from Rioja, you'd make that case for it. I mean, I'm think you're going to say yes, aren't you?
So, I'm so pleased you asked that, because last year we did. Go back a bit. During COVID, my son came home and started working with me, and we tasted 1,000 rosés from southern France, did an e-guide, and at the end we said, why are they different? What's happening? So then we wrote a book about the differences of rosés of southern France, and we still weren't reaching people to explain that. So last June we did a trade day just on rosé, and the response was brilliant.
Was this Fine Rosé Day?
The Fine Rosé Day.
Yeah.
So we're doing the second Fine Rosé Day next October, and we're going to start off the night before with a debate on, can rosé be a fine wine, and a walk-around tasting of old vintages.
Oh, what fun. Where are you going to do that?
I'm actually, next 2 weeks' time, we're going to be looking at venues with Liberation Cardiff. Do you know, come across it?
Yeah.
So we're doing it with them.
In London, it'll be, will it? Yeah, great. I mean, if I'm around, I'd love to come to that. So your answer is yes. Yeah, fine. It can make fine wine, and it can age, because that's the problem with rosé, it's like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc or Albarino from Rio Baixas. Everybody thinks you've got to drink it within 3 months of the vintage, or it's going to be dead, right?
Exactly. So this is, it'll be interesting. We've got some interesting opposition discussion. So we will see whether it can make a fine rosé. But I think, if you drink your cheap supermarket rosé, no, it doesn't age. As you say, like Sauvignon Blanc, cheap Sauvignon Blanc, you wouldn't want to age it.
Yeah.
So yes, and then we're doing another rosé day in June, which is going to be a bit more inclusivity, sustainability.
And what about Drink Pink? What, the Drink Pink Wednesday? Is that every week?
That's the June one.
No, that's the June one, right? Okay, good. I mean, what's the greatest rosé you've ever tasted? I mean, I think we have to leave out champagne because champagne's a different category almost. Isn't it? The greatest non-sparkling rosé you've had, and I also want to know the worst. And was it a blush or a white zin?
I think my favourite rosés. There are several. I've loved some of the Rioja rosés. That was a revelation. There are some stunning wines. The fact that the Grand Reserva 2012 is the current vintage. I mean, just brilliant. And I loved their innovation and what they were doing. Really like Moscofilero rosé from Troupis in the centre of Greece.
Yeah.
I quite like natural rosé.
Yeah.
Slightly darker, a bit cloudy. And there are Provence rosés that are really exciting, but you just don't find them.
They're not the big brands, presumably.
Not the big brands.
Yeah. And what's the worst you've had? Was it a white zin?
I loathe rosés that have that Sauvignon Blanc feel character.
Yeah.
Really.
That's slightly sickly, you mean? Yeah.
Yes, and leafy and.
Yeah.
So I remember Michael Broadbent saying, if you get a book of wine like Chardonnay or white zin, put it in the freezer till it's so cold you can't taste it. Nobody will know.
And which grape varieties are best suited to rosé? We've talked a little bit about whites and this blend of red and whites, but if you were looking at red grape varieties, you've made your feelings clear about Mourvèdre. I mean, Grenache, Cinsault, would those be the premium varieties?
Grenache is pretty good. Pinot Noir makes good rosé. I think it's grapes that don't have vast amount of tannins.
Yeah.
Because then you're manipulating it too much. Sangiovese makes beautiful rosé.
Yeah.
Blau Frankish.
Yeah, maybe Frappato or something like that. Those sorts of things.
Yeah. I mean,
lighter red grapes, really. It's interesting, isn't it?
So Syrah can make Syrah, Merlot. I find them too jammy.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I mean, can rosé age? I mean, you've mentioned Tondonia. I mean, current release 2012. That Thymiopoulos I've had, I think I've got a bottle downstairs, is 13. Yeah. I mean, are we drinking them too young? I mean, not the supermarket stuff, but the best stuff.
I think so. Well, they always say the English like old vintages, don't they? When we did the Rosés of Southern France book, we tasted Tavel back to 1975.
Wow.
Stunning.
I've never had that. I mean, I've had old Tondonias, but I've never had an old Tavel. But it makes sense. I mean, they're quite structured wines, aren't they? They're always made with Saignée, are they?
Yes,
Tavel?
have to be.
Yeah.
But
have to be, right.
Skin contact can be between 6 hours and 7 days.
Yeah. Very interesting. I mean, let's talk a little bit more about Provence rosés, because I mean, some of the prices, especially as we said, if they're linked to a celebrity, are pretty steep these days. I mean, do consumers get what they pay for them? And I sense that you're steering them away from the big brands in a way.
To a certain extent, but something like Whispering Angel, you are guaranteed a quality. It is very, very consistent year on, year out.
Yeah.
It has a beautiful marketing, and it's one of those things. If you turned up at someone's house with a bottle of Whispering Angel, no one will say you've made a mistake.
Yeah, it's funny. We did a 3 wine men event last week, and there was an engraver there, and she would do this thing where she'd engrave the bottle saying Happy Christmas X or Y, and the most popular wine by far was Whispering Angel. So it's got, it's a bit like Cloudy Bay was in its day, that it has this very, and no surprise that LVMH have bought it, right? They're smart. They spot good brands. Yeah?
And I have to say, doing quite a bit of work with LVMH for these various rosé days, they've been an absolute professional joy to work with.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And, very good at marketing and good on quality. I think they care about quality. I mean, maybe not Moet itself so much, but, I think the premium brands are very good. Yeah. I mean, you're doing a bit to change the image of pink wines, aren't you? Do you sometimes feel like a voice in the wilderness? Or I mean, probably not now, because rosé has become so much a part of the mainstream. And sales continue to grow. It's actually a successful bit of the wine world, isn't it?
It's a voice in the wilderness as far as the MWs are concerned.
Are other MWs, not me, but we're doing the podcast, but are other MWs a bit snooty about it and go, are you still doing rosé, Liz, or have we moved on to something else?
Yet? When are you doing proper wine? Which just makes me sort of more determined to sort of carry on. Because I suppose I feel quite strongly that wine, we are in the world, the business of wine.
Yeah.
We need to work, but they need to work. And as you say, rosé is the most successful category. I mean, white is growing, but rosé is massively popular.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that rosé is diverging into two different categories. There is the massive commercial side, and which is why we have the Drink Pink Wednesday theme. And then there is the fine rosé side. Yeah. And maybe rosé is now growing up to be able to have that diverging style.
Yeah.
I do feel that I would like more professionals to actually recognise that some of the mistakes I see on importers' wine lists for rosé, and you can think
in terms of what, just lack of knowledge about
lack of knowledge on how rosé is made, where it's come from. If they did that for the Burgundy or the Bordeaux section, everybody would be outraged. But rosé doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think you're very right. Yeah, and I think it's an indictment of wine professionals in a way, that they're not taking something which is so important to the market properly. And the same thing is true with consumers. Consumers love it. Listen, final question. How do you get away from wine? I mean, you're in the Alps, so lots of walking. You're still reading history books, although not the whole thing, just a chapter. How do you get away from wine?
I enjoy walking. I'm not like my kids who just climb mountains like goats. It's disgusting.
Well, I suppose they're brought up with it almost.
They're brought up with it, yes. They sort of we'll just walk to Italy and back. We'll see you at lunchtime, which is really frustrating. So they probably would say I stroll around. I find it you don't have the same pace. When I go to London, I come back exhausted.
Yeah.
Here, it's like you walk down to the village, you have a coffee, you meet friends, you sit in the sun for lunch. It's very much low key. Drive to Italy. We can get to Italy very quickly. Go to Nice, get to the coast. I do still go to the opera and ballet in Nice. I read. We've ended up with I'm just looking at some of the books. We've ended up with quite a large library, just because I don't like getting rid of books. And so
I'm exactly like you.
Yeah.
It sounds idyllic. I can see why you moved there. I mean, sometimes I wonder what we're all doing living in big cities and stressing ourselves out. I mean, it's proximity to art and culture and restaurants, but you can still travel to them, can't you?
Well, so I'm 66 kilometres from Nice.
There you go.
And we have a bus from my village to the airport for €1.50.
Sounds great. I can see why you moved.
Yeah, but it's been more difficult in the past 7 years, obviously. But yeah.
Yeah. And just tell us about the book coming out next year on the wines of Provence.
Oh, yes. So
Académie du Vin Library, yeah?
Yes, Académie du Vin Classic Wine Library. So the new book is going to be The Wines of Provence, which I'm writing with my son, Ben. And obviously it's going to have a lot of history.
Yeah, good.
So
Lots of castles.
I've spent the past 2 months trawling. I've got a large number of books that I bought about Provence since the 80s, and just tracing the evolution of how estates developed, where they developed, how it all came about. So I'm hoping it'll be a deep dive into the history and culture of Provence as much as the wine.
It's a book we need. I'm looking forward to reading it when it comes out next year. Coming out next year?
We submit September the 1st, so I guess it depends on how many errors there are.
How fast they turn it around. Well, knowing you, not many. Listen, Liz, it's been fantastic talking to you. I learned a lot about rosé. The books are all available online, aren't they? Most of them download?
So the self-published Rosés of Southern France is available on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I think Rosé, Understanding the Pink Wine Revolution is as well, or via Classic Wine Library. Yeah.
Brilliant. Lovely to talk to you, and I'll see you very soon in London, probably, but if not in Provence.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
What a fascinating career, and it's good to learn about rosé from someone who really knows what they're talking about. Next time on Cork Talk, after a 2-week break for Christmas and New Year, my guest will be Jen Parr from Valley Wine in New Zealand. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.